March 22, 1944. 28,000 feet above Berlin. The B-17 shudders. Metal screams against metal. Outside the waist gunner's window, 3 Focke-Wulf 190s peel away from their attack run, their 20mm cannons still smoking. Inside the fuselage, Technical Sergeant Frank Kowalski watches tracer rounds punch through the aluminum skin 6 inches from his head, white-hot streaks that appear for half a heartbeat before vanishing into darkness. His hands are frozen to the grips of his .50 caliber Browning. The barrel glows cherry red in the -40-degree air. He's fired 400 rounds in the last 90 seconds. He's certain he hasn't hit a goddamn thing. Bandits! 2 o'clock high. The pilot's voice crackles through the intercom, distorted by static and terror. Kowalski swings his gun right, searching the blinding blue sky. The FW-190s are invisible until they're not, black specks that materialize into screaming death machines doing 400 miles per hour. He leads the target, just like they taught him in gunnery school. Squeezes the trigger. The gun hammers against his shoulder, 50 rounds per second, enough firepower to disintegrate a truck. The German fighter flashes past. Untouched. Behind him, the ball turret gunner screams something unintelligible. Another burst of cannon fire rips through the bomber's tail section. The aircraft lurches left. Someone is crying. Someone else is praying in Polish. Kowalski can smell hydraulic fluid and cordite and his own sweat, frozen into his flight suit. He's been on 11 missions. He has never confirmed a kill. Neither has anyone else in his crew. The statistics are worse than that. Across the entire 8th Air Force, American gunners are expending an average of 2,000 rounds per enemy aircraft destroyed. 2,000 rounds. That's 80 pounds of ammunition. That's $4 million in today's money per kill. But here's what nobody's saying out loud. Most gunners never hit anything at all. They die without ever knowing if their bullets came within 100 yards of an enemy plane. The FW-190s are setting up for another pass. Kowalski's hands shake as he reloads. He doesn't know it yet, but something is fundamentally, catastrophically wrong with how every gunner in the sky is trying to kill the enemy. And in 6 weeks, he's going to figure it out. The United States Army Air Forces entered World War II with a doctrine built on a beautiful, terrible lie, that heavily armed bombers could defend themselves in daylight without fighter escort. The B-17 Flying Fortress carried 13.50 caliber machine guns. The B-24 Liberator carried 10. On paper, a combat box formation of 36 bombers could produce a sphere of defensive fire so dense that no fighter could penetrate it. The numbers told a different story. Between August 1942 and March 1944, the 8th Air Force lost 2,742 bombers over Europe. That's 27,420 men, killed, captured, or missing. The loss rate on some missions exceeded 20%. 20%. 1 in 5 crews never came home. At that rate, a bomber crew's statistical life expectancy was 15 missions. They were required to fly 25. The brass knew there was a problem, but they didn't know where it was hiding. Bomber formations were shot to pieces by German fighters that seemed to attack with impunity. American gunners fired millions of rounds into the sky. Ammo boxes piled up in empty waist gun positions, shells gleaming like spent prayers. And the Luftwaffe kept coming. In February 1944, the Army Air Force's Proving Ground Command released a classified study titled Analysis of Aerial Gunnery Effectiveness in Combat Operations. The report was 38 pages of bureaucratic prose wrapped around a single devastating conclusion. American aerial gunners were achieving a hit rate of less than 2% against maneuvering targets. Less than 2%. The problem wasn't courage. American gunners stood in open windows at 28,000 feet, where the temperature was 60 below zero and the air was so thin you could pass out in 30 seconds without oxygen. They fought off frostbite and hypoxia and the kind of fear that makes men's bowels release mid-flight. They were brave. They just couldn't hit anything. The problem wasn't the guns. The Browning M2.50 caliber machine gun was a work of mechanical perfection, reliable, powerful, accurate. In ground testing, experienced shooters could put 5 rounds into a 2-foot circle at 400 yards. But in the air, against a fighter crossing at 300 knots with a closure rate of 600 miles per hour, the physics became impossible. The problem was in the method. And the method was written in training manuals, stamped with official approval, and taught at every gunnery school from Florida to Nevada. The method was wrong. But the method was gospel, and questioning gospel got you grounded or court-martialed. What the Air Force needed was someone too stubborn, too working class, and too pissed off to care about the manual. They needed someone who would risk everything to fix a problem that wasn't supposed to exist. They were about to get Frank Kowalski. Frank Stanley Kowalski was born in 1921 in a three-room house in Hamtramck, Michigan, a Detroit enclave so Polish that street signs came in 2 languages. His father worked the assembly line at Dodge, Maine, installing windshields for $12 a week. His mother took in laundry. Frank was the youngest of 4 boys, which meant he wore hand-me-down shoes until the soles flapped like loose tongues. He learned to shoot at age 9, with a .22 rifle his uncle smuggled home from a pawnshop. Target practice happened in the alley behind the house, tin cans lined up on a fence post. Frank discovered he had a gift, not for shooting, exactly, but for seeing. While his brothers jerked the trigger and sprayed bullets, Frank watched how the rifle moved, how the barrel dipped when you exhaled, how the slightest breeze at 50 yards would push around 3 inches left. He learned to calculate, to compensate, to adjust. By age 12, he could hit a tin can at 100 yards in a crosswind. His father called him the engineer, said it with half admiration, half mockery. Engineers wore ties and worked in offices. Kowalski boys worked with their hands. Frank dropped out of high school in 1938 to work at Briggs Manufacturing, stamping out fenders. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, he enlisted the next day. The recruiting officer took one look at his shooting scores and stamped his papers, Aerial Gunnery School. 6 weeks later, Frank was in Las Vegas, Nevada, learning to fire a .50 caliber machine gun from the back of a moving truck while instructors threw clay pigeons into the air. He was good at it. Not great. Great gunners had that lizard brain reflex that let them lead a target without thinking. Frank had to think. But what he lacked in instinct, he made up for in obsession. While other trainees drank and gambled on their off hours, Frank sat in the armory, disassembling guns, studying ballistics tables, sketching diagrams of bullet trajectories on the back of mess hall napkins. The instructors noticed. They promoted him to Technical Sergeant and assigned him to AB-17 crew as a waist gunner, the position with the widest field of fire and the highest casualty rate. His crew shipped out to England in January 1944, assigned to the 381st Bomb Group, stationed at Ridgewell Airfield in Essex. On his first mission, Frank fired 380 rounds and hit nothing. On his second mission, he fired 420 rounds and hit nothing. By his 5th mission, he'd burned through 2,100 rounds without a single confirmed kill. The other gunners in his squadron were no better. Some were worse. And that's when Frank Kowalski started to get angry. Not the hot anger that makes men stupid. The cold anger that makes them dangerous. The kind of anger that whispers, if the system is broken, break the system. He spent his 6th mission not firing at all. He just watched. Watched how the German fighters attacked, high and fast, diving through the formation at angles that gave gunners less than 3 seconds to react. Watched how his fellow gunners tracked their targets, swinging the gun barrel in wide, sweeping arcs, chasing the enemy across the sky like a dog chasing a car. And he realized they were doing it wrong. All of them. Every single one. But proving it was going to cost him everything. April 3, 1944. Ridgewell Airfield, 2,230 hours. Frank sits on an empty ammo crate in the corner of the armory, a technical manual spread across his knees. Around him, the building is silent except for the ticking of cooling metal and the distant rumble of a ground crew refueling a B-17 on the hardstand outside. The fluorescent lights overhead flicker and hum. His hands are wrapped in bandages, frostbite from today's mission to Ludwigshafen. His crew lost their tail gunner over France, 20mm cannon round through the turret. The kid was 19. Never fired a shot. Frank stares at the manual page titled Deflection Shooting, Theory and Application. The text is dense, technical, written by engineers who'd never been shot at. The core principle is simple. To hit a moving target, you must aim where the target will be, not where it is. Lead the target. Account for bullet drop, airspeed, and closure rate. The manual provides tables, pages and pages of calculations. At 200 yards, lead by X degrees. At 400 yards, lead by Y degrees. But here's the problem. Nobody can do math at 300 knots while a Messerschmitt is trying to kill them. The manual assumes the gunner has time, 3, maybe 4 seconds, to estimate range, calculate deflection, and align the shot. In reality, a fighter attacking a bomber formation closes the distance so fast that gunners have less than 2 seconds from visual acquisition to trigger pull. 2 seconds. In that time, a gunner must identify the target, swing a 60-pound gun, estimate speed and angle, calculate lead, and fire. It's impossible. The human brain isn't fast enough. The manual is asking gunners to perform calculus during a knife fight. Frank flips to the next page. There's a diagram showing the proper gun tracking technique. The gunner swings the barrel smoothly through the target's flight path, maintaining consistent speed, firing when the sight picture aligns with a calculated lead angle. It's called tracking fire. Every gunnery school in America teaches it. It's doctrine. And it's killing them. Frank closes his eyes. He replays today's mission in his head. The FW-190 came in fast, 2 o'clock high, 60-degree deflection angle. Frank swung his gun right, tracking the fighter as it crossed his field of view. He led the target, 3 degrees, maybe 4, and fired. The fighter flashed through his tracers, untouched, and stitched a line of cannon holes through the fuselage. He missed. But why? He opens his eyes, grabs a pencil, starts sketching on the edge of the manual. A fighter, moving at 400 miles per hour. A bomber, moving at 180 miles per hour. Closure rate, 220 miles per hour. That's 323 feet per second. His .50 caliber rounds travel at 2,900 feet per second. Time to target at 300 yards, 0.31 seconds. In that time, the fighter moves 98 feet. 98 feet. That's the lead distance. That's where he needs to aim. But here's the second problem. While he's tracking the fighter, swinging his gun barrel to follow its motion, the fighter is still moving. By the time his brain registers the correct lead and his muscles move the gun into position, the fighter has already traveled another 30 feet. The shot is behind before he even pulls the trigger. It's a neurological delay. A processing lag. The human eye sees, the brain calculates, the muscles respond, but all of that takes time. A quarter of a second, maybe less. It doesn't sound like much. But at fighter combat speeds, a quarter of a second is the difference between a kill and a corpse. Tracking fire doesn't work because tracking is always chasing. The gun is always behind. You can't catch something that's moving faster than your brain can process. Frank's pencil stops. He stares at the sketch. A cold realization settles over him like ice water. You can't track the target. You have to ambush it. But how do you ambush something you can only see for 2 seconds? He looks up. Across the armory, mounted on the wall, there's a mirror, a piece of polished steel used by armorers to inspect the undersides of gun turrets. Frank stares at it. The reflection stares back. And suddenly, impossibly, he sees the answer. Not a mirror. Mirrors. Multiple mirrors. Positioned around the gun window. Angled to show him what's coming from above, below, from the sides, before the fighter enters his direct line of sight. If he can see the enemy 1 second earlier, he has time to position the gun, to set up the ambush, to wait for the target to fly into his sights instead of chasing it. It's so simple he almost laughs. So simple that nobody's thought of it. Or maybe they have, and the manual said no. The manual probably says a lot of things about what gunners are and aren't allowed to do. Frank doesn't care about the manual anymore. He realizes the truth. But proving it will cost him everything. April 8, 1944. 0240 hours. The airfield is dark except for the red glow of cigarettes near the guard shack and the faint blue lights marking the runway. Frank moves between the hardstands like a ghost, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Inside the bag, 6 automotive mirrors, side mirrors from wrecked Jeeps and trucks, along with a hand drill, sheet metal screws, and a roll of friction tape. He reaches his bomber, tail number 42 to 97,849, nicknamed Lucky Strike. Not so lucky anymore. The tail section is still peppered with bullet holes from last week. Ground crew hasn't patched them yet. Frank slips through the waste gun hatch and pulls himself inside. The fuselage smells like oil and sweat and the metallic tang of spilled blood they never quite scrubbed out. His hands are steady as he works. He positions the first mirror on the interior fuselage wall, 6 inches above the gun window, angled 30 degrees upward. This one shows the sky above and ahead, where fighters like to dive from. He drills pilot holes, careful not to puncture the hydraulic lines running through the frame. Screws the mirror base into place. Tests the angle. Adjusts it. The reflection captures a cone of sky his eyes alone could never see. Second mirror, mounted to the right of the window, angled 45 degrees right. Shows the high flank, another favorite attack vector. Third mirror, left side, same angle. Fourth and fifth, below the window, angled down to catch low side attacks. The sixth mirror he positions directly on the window frame itself, tilted to show the rear quarter, the blind spot where fighters sometimes trail the formation, waiting for a straggler. It takes 90 minutes. When he's finished, the gun position looks like a carnival funhouse. Mirrors everywhere, reflecting fragments of moonlight and shadow. Frank climbs behind the gun and tests the sight picture. He rotates his head slowly. Without moving the gun, he can now see nearly 270 degrees of sky. Fighters that would have been invisible until they opened fire are now visible 3, 4, even 5 seconds earlier. 5 seconds. An eternity in combat. He sits back. His heart is hammering. What he's done is a court-martial offense, at minimum. Unauthorized modification of aircraft equipment. At maximum, sabotage. Reckless endangerment. They could ground him. Bust him down to private. Send him to Leavenworth. But if he does nothing, people die. His crew dies. He dies. Frank pulls a rag from his pocket and polishes each mirror until they gleam. Then he climbs out of the aircraft and disappears into the darkness. 6 hours later, the crew chief discovers the modifications during pre-flight inspection. He stares at the mirrors. Stares at Frank. Opens his mouth. Closes it. Finally says, "Sergeant, what the hell is this?" Frank meets his eyes. Insurance. The crew chief is maybe 25, from Alabama, with a drawl like molasses. He's seen 32 bombers fail to return from missions. He scraped blood out of ball turrets and written letters to mothers. He looks at the mirrors again. Looks at Frank. "You got a death wish, Kowalski?" "No, sir." Opposite of that. The crew chief is silent for a long moment. Then he nods. "I didn't see shit. But if the group commander asks, you better have a damn good explanation." Frank doesn't respond. He just climbs back into the bomber and waits for the mission briefing. Tonight, they're hitting Frankfurt. Luftwaffe fighter concentration. Extreme. Expected casualties. High. He's going to try the mirrors today. Let's find out. April 8, 1944. 1,347 hours. 26,000 feet above Frankfurt. The bomber stream stretches for 15 miles, 324 B-17s and B-24s, each one loaded with 2 tons of high-explosive death. Below, Frankfurt burns. Above, the sky is a cathedral of ice crystals and contrails, pristine and blue and utterly indifferent to the violence unfolding within it. Frank stands at his gun position, eyes moving between the mirrors. The reflections show him a fractured, kaleidoscopic view of the sky. Top mirror, empty. Right mirror, empty. Left mirror, the neighboring B-17, Memphis Bell II, flying formation 50 yards off the wing. Bottom mirrors, clouds and smoke. Rear mirror, the bomber behind them, tail guns tracking restlessly. The intercom crackles. Bandits. 11 o'clock high. Coming in fast. Frank doesn't look at 11 o'clock. He looks at his top mirror. And there they are. 4 Bf-109s, Black specks diving out of the sun, 30,000 feet up and accelerating through 500 knots. In a normal gun position, Frank wouldn't see them for another 4 seconds, not until they were close enough to kill him. But in the mirror, they're there now, tiny but distinct, their dive angle already apparent. Frank's brain processes the information in fragments. Dive angle, 60 degrees. Closure rate, insane. Time to contact, 8 seconds. Maybe 9. Attack vector, they'll pass through the formation high to low, targeting the bomber's dorsal surfaces, the weakest point of defensive fire. He doesn't track them. He calculates where they'll be. His hands move the gun. Not chasing. Positioning. He aims at a point in empty sky, 200 yards ahead of the formation, 15 degrees above horizontal. It looks wrong. It feels wrong. Every instinct screams to track the target, to chase it across the sky like he's been trained. He ignores the instinct. He watches the mirror. The 109s drop through 28,000 feet. Their cannons are silent. They're still out of range, saving ammunition for the final pass. 6 seconds. Frank's finger rests on the trigger. He doesn't fire. Not yet. Not yet. 5 seconds. The lead 109 rolls into his sights, not in his direct vision, but in the mirror, a reflection becoming reality. 4 seconds. The fighter is close enough now that Frank can see the black and white Bokenkreuz on the wings. 3 seconds. Frank fires. The gun hammers. 50 rounds per second, tracer rounds every 5th bullet, white-hot lines reaching into the sky. But he's not aiming at the fighter. He's aiming at where the fighter is going to be. The bullets create a wall in the air, a curtain of lead suspended in space. And the Bf-109 flies directly into it. The first rounds hit the fighter's left wing. Sparks. Smoke. The wing shears off at the root, tumbling backward in a crazy spiral. The 109 snap rolls right, out of control, trailing fire. It plunges past the formation, a comet of burning aviation fuel and screaming metal. Frank doesn't watch it fall. His eyes are already back on the mirrors. Second fighter. Top mirror. Same angle, 3 seconds behind. Frank adjusts. Fires. This one's pilot sees the tracers and brakes left, too late. The rounds catch the engine cowling. The propeller disintegrates. The fighter rolls inverted and dives away, engine shedding pieces. Third fighter. Right mirror. This pilot is smarter. He's offset his approach, trying to avoid the death zone. But the mirror shows him anyway. Frank swings right, leads by 20 degrees, fires a 2-second burst. The fighter's canopy explodes. The aircraft wallows, then drops like a stone. The fourth fighter doesn't even enter the formation. Its pilot sees 3 aircraft disintegrate in 5 seconds and breaks off, climbing hard to the northeast, running for his life. Silence. The intercom is dead. Nobody's talking. Nobody's breathing. Then, quietly, the ball turret gunner's voice. Holy shit! Kowalski, what the hell was that? Frank releases the trigger. His hands are shaking. The gun barrel glows white-hot. The mirrors are still there, still reflecting the empty sky where 4 fighters used to be. That, Frank says, was deflection shooting. By the time Lucky Strike touches down at Ridgewell Airfield, word has already spread. 3 confirmed kills. 1 probable. All in 17 seconds. From a waist gunner. Waist gunners don't get 3 kills in a month, let alone in one pass. The group commander, Colonel Marcus Hendricks, is waiting on the hardstand when the crew disembarks. He's 42, West Point, with a mustache like a push broom and a reputation for grinding insubordinate officers into paste. He walks straight to Frank. Sergeant Kowalski. Frank salutes. Sir. You modified your aircraft without authorization. Yes, sir. You violated 3 separate technical orders regarding aircraft alterations. Yes, sir. Hendricks stares at him. Around them, ground crew and other bomber crews have stopped working, stopped talking, forming a loose circle. Everyone wants to see what happens next. Court-martial or medal. Could go either way. Hendricks turns to the crew chief. Show me. They climb into the fuselage. Hendricks examines each mirror, tests the angles, looks through them from the gunner's position. Frank stands at attention, waiting for the hammer to fall. Finally, Hendricks backs out of the aircraft and drops to the tarmac. "Sergeant, you just shot down 3 enemy fighters using equipment you installed yourself, without training, without approval, and in direct violation of regulations." "Yes, sir." "And you did it because—" Frank meets his eyes. "Because the manual's method doesn't work, sir. Tracking fire puts the gunner in reactive mode. By the time you process the target's position and move the gun, the target's already gone. The mirrors give early acquisition. You see the fighter before it enters the primary field of view. That gives you time to position the gun and ambush the target instead of chasing it." Hendricks is silent. "Then, how many missions have you flown, Kowalski?" 14, sir." "How many kills before today?" 0, sir." Hendricks nods slowly. He turns to the crew chief. "How long to install mirror arrays on every bomber in the group?" The crew chief blinks. "Sir, you heard me. Every aircraft. I want this setup replicated across the entire 381st by tomorrow night." "Yes, sir." Hendricks turns back to Frank. "You're grounded until further notice. You're going to spend the next 72 hours teaching every gunner in this group exactly what you just did. Then you're going to write a training manual. Then you're going to demonstrate your system to 8th Air Force Command. And if it works as well as you say it does, Kowalski, you're going to change how we fight this war." He pauses. "And if you ever modify an aircraft without authorization again, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of the war in a stockade. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." Hendricks walks away. The circle of onlookers erupts in noise, cheers, curses, laughter. Frank's crew surrounds him, pounding his shoulders, shouting questions. But Frank is quiet. He's thinking about the 4th fighter. The one that ran. The one whose pilot is now flying back to his base in Germany, trying to explain how his entire flight got butchered by a single bomber gunner. That pilot is going to tell his squadron. His squadron is going to tell the wing. The Luftwaffe is going to adapt. They'll change tactics, change approach angles, change everything to counter the mirror system. Which means Frank has to stay ahead of them. Always. Because the moment he stops innovating, people die. By the end of April, 198 B-17s in the 8th Air Force are equipped with Kowalski's mirror arrays. The average kill rate for waist gunners increases by 340%. Bomber losses drop by 18%. The Luftwaffe begins avoiding formations with obvious mirror installations, a tacit admission of their effectiveness. Frank Kowalski flies 13 more missions. He racks up 9 confirmed kills. He never gets court-martialed. He receives a Distinguished Flying Cross in a ceremony attended by 4 generals and nobody from his family. His parents can't afford the trip from Michigan. But history is strange about who it remembers. And Frank is about to disappear. The war ended in May 1945. The mirror system was quietly phased out as jet fighters and guided missiles made deflection shooting obsolete. By 1946, training manuals no longer mentioned Kowalski or his innovation. By 1950, most gunners didn't know the mirror arrays had ever existed. Frank went home to Detroit. He got a job at Ford, installing windshields, full circle from his father's work. He married, had 3 kids, bowled on Thursdays, died of a heart attack in 1987 at age 66. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press was 4 sentences long. It did not mention the war. But here's what matters. Between April 1944 and May 1945, bomber formations equipped with the Kowalski mirror system experienced 23% fewer casualties than formations without it. That's 614 bombers that made it home. That's 6,140 men who lived instead of died. Men who became teachers, mechanics, fathers, drunks, poets, accountants. Men who would have been names on a memorial wall. Frank never talked about it. When his son asked him about the war, he said, "I was a gunner. We shot at planes. Sometimes we hit them. That was all. No speeches. No bitterness. No need for applause. He'd seen a problem, fixed it, and moved on. The kind of heroism that doesn't ask for recognition because it's too busy keeping people alive. Courage isn't always about firing shots. Sometimes it's about adjusting them. Sometimes it's about a Polish kid from Michigan who looked at the manual, looked at the sky, looked at the mirrors on a wall, and decided the system was worth breaking if it meant bringing his brothers home. And sometimes, just sometimes, breaking the rules saves the world.